screen over a little bit. Welcome to Dr. Kiki's story time. Welcome to another episode of San Francisco Stories, as written by my grandfather, Tro Harper, in his book, Nowhere Except San Francisco, Memoirs of a Resident Tourist. So I'm going to read today until a little before 3:30 because I've been dealing with my son having kung fu and making sure we keep a regular schedule. So I will keep myself on a clock as opposed to just reading until the end of the chapter. But thank you all for joining me. I'm glad to be here for another day. I hope you enjoy this chapter. The Chinatown of Lillie Lum. Lillie Lum was a slight American Chinese, scarcely 5 feet tall, and if she ever got on a doctor's scale, the nurse weighing her would have accused her of having 1 foot on the floor. She lived her entire life in San Francisco's Chinatown, never moving farther than 2 blocks away from the building in which she was born until she retired. It was a stormy life, filled with astonishing twists and turns, a life that was visceral, breathing proof that indomitable spirit, endless patience, and, above all, a rigorous denial of the self could carve a pathway through obstacles and social barriers that would have destroyed any lesser spirit. She was descended from people who crawled, shivered, starved, suffered torture, All right, am I back? Is that audio? Can you hear me in the back, everyone? Sorry, my computer crashed. Can you hear me? I can hear me. Good. Check, check. 1, 2, 3. Should I start that chapter over? Yes, I should. Sorry about that. My computer likes to crash occasionally, so that's what it did. But here, let's start again, because that was about 10 to 15 seconds of crashness and silence. All right, the Chinatown of Lillie Lum, as I start over. Lillie Lum was a slight American Chinese, scarcely 5 feet tall, and if she ever got on a doctor's scale, the nurse weighing her would have accused her of having 1 foot on the floor. She lived her entire life in San Francisco's Chinatown, never moving farther than 2 blocks away from the building in which she was born until she retired. It was a stormy life, filled with astonishing twists and turns, a life that was visceral, breathing proof that indomitable spirit, endless patience, and above all, a rigorous denial of the self could carve a pathway through obstacles and social barriers that would have destroyed any lesser spirit. She was descended from people who crawled, shivered, starved, suffered torture and misery to get to the country known to their forebears as Gold Mountain. Chinese who came to mine gold, cultivate fields, and build railroads became Americans, some by skill or special knowledge, but most through iron-willed endurance. In 1911, when Lillie Lum was born, social stumbling blocks were many and varied. Her immediate world was one of concentrated discrimination by the white majority. Lillie grew up in a family that spoke little English and read none, making it almost impossible to become fully Americanized until she was married. California's first Chinese were 2 men and 1 woman. They had sustained a 3-month journey across the Pacific, intent on profiting from the discovery of gold in 1849. But most of the Argonauts, native and foreign, soon discovered finding gold in California was a frustrating endeavor. There was great promise and scant payoff. Excuse me. Between 1850 and 1860, clipper ships of the China trade brought approximately 25,000 laborers and peasants from Guangdong province alone. Widespread famine made it very easy to leave China, sustaining hope for the future. That was the tough part. The immigrants landed in San Francisco with little more than great expectations, and these were soon dashed when the immigrants discovered the only work was menial. To survive, they took jobs as support troops for miners who had plenty of money. Quickly, they fell back on ancient trades, vegetable peddlers, fishermen, servants, and gamblers. Although they came from a nation where the first mechanical clock, the first iron plow, the first movable type, and printed books were invented, they could find nothing but drudgery in the new land. The more persistent got to the mines, only to find that few or no claims were available. There were, however, tailings, or small heaps of rock and gravel left by the white miners as no longer worth the trouble of further washing. What little gold was left, they sifted out, only to discover the state demanded a foreign miner's tax on the whatever gold was found. Menial work in gold rush San Francisco began to look better and better if they were to live long enough to buy a passage home. When President Lincoln signed the bill authorizing the Transcontinental Railroad, employment problems eased somewhat. As many as 5,000 men a month were hired as roustabouts, gandy dancers, water boys, and whatever was needed at a given time, at a salary of $30 a month. Since the Chinese were willing to work long hours at low pay, American laborers, most of whom were of Irish descent, began a brutal persecution of these heathens, a persecution that finally culminated in the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 that barred Orientals not only from entering the country or becoming citizens, but also forbade them taking many manufacturing jobs. An exception was owning a laundry. Laundries were cheap to open and filled a definite need in the rapidly growing city. The Chinese had understood several dynasties back the axiom Henry Kaiser thought he had invented: find a need and fill it. It had been part and parcel of Chinese life for centuries. Grover Cleveland, the then President of the United States, supported the Exclusion Act, declaring that Chinese were ignorant of the American Constitution and laws. He said it would be impossible for them to assimilate and would be dangerous to the general peace and welfare. This sort of hazing seemed to greet each new nationality as it sought to become American. Dennis Kearney and his Working Men's Party, having grown weary of toiling at the low-paid tasks assigned them, instigated this peculiar bit of legislation. Street corner shouters and sandlot orators claimed the Chinese were a threat not only to jobs but to civilization itself. After all, they were heathens who were willing to work long hours for low pay and rarely, if ever, complained. Their battle cry became, "The Chinese must go." These self-appointed saviors of American culture ran in gangs, hoodlum groups that liked nothing better than to find a Chinese peddler tip his basket of either fruit or vegetables into the street and then run off, laughing madly. If they could find a white-jacketed cook on his way to market, they would grab an overripe tomato and fire it at the hapless shopper. If they could catch two Chinese at one time, the hoods would tie their queues together and hang the screaming men from the nearest balcony. Occasionally, the helpless Chinese were clubbed to death in the name of racial superiority. The Chinese Exclusion Act was at last repealed in 1943 during the Second World War. While the jingoistic ideology had changed somewhat by the time Lillie Lum was born, persecution was just as vicious, if not quite as overt. The only jobs open to the Chinese were those no one else would do, and in the lowest pay brackets. Lillie's father, Chin Wei, arrived in San Francisco at the turn of the century and found work with other immigrants in the fishing industry, then thriving in Alaska. When he was seldom home, he was a good provider, and Lillie always spoke of him with affection. While working on the Balclutha, a ship that has today found a less taxing role at the Maritime Museum at the foot of Hyde Street's famous cable line, he suffered an accident and was so badly wounded his captain sent him to Seattle, where gangrene set in. By the time he reached San Francisco, the infection was impossible to stop. Lillie was 8 years old when her father died. Left with 5 children at age 27, her mother, a bride who had been imported from China, went to work as a garment stitcher. By helping her mother after school, Lillie began her education in sewing, a skill that was later to provide her own children with food and clothing. In this matter, she was following an old China tradition that preached the subordination of a child's interests to the welfare of the family. Although the English language is a barrier for the Chinese born in China, children born to these families waste no time as victims of multicultural theory. Not only do they learn English in the public schools of San Francisco, they also attend a Chinese school where they learn 1 or 2 of the several dialects spoken in the various provinces of China. They also learn how to write or draw the classical characters of the Chinese written language, since all Chinese from anywhere in China can communicate through its intricate orthography. In present-day Beijing, it is a common sight to witness 2 citizens tracing written characters with their fingers on their open hands to be understood by their correspondent from another province. Chinese movies made for export show both Chinese and English subtitles on the screen. A dialect from a northern province is as unintelligible to someone from a southern province as is English. With English and written Chinese at the bottom of the screen, everyone can understand the actors. Today, immigration from mainland China that began in 1965 brought people who speak Mandarin. They now comprise about 1/3 of the population, and many merchants and restaurant people have had to become trilingual. For the San Francisco Chinese, Cantonese is still the language of choice. Lillie's education was typical. Through the 8th grade, she attended Commodore Stockton School, then on the edge of Chinatown. In the tradition of the area, she went on to one of 6 Chinese language schools in the afternoon. There she learned to write Chinese characters, a skill that she turned into an art. In later life, she taught small children who gathered in her apartment on Grant Avenue. Early on, Lillie learned what it meant to be different. Living in San Francisco's Chinatown from the day she was born in 1911, she had probably never heard the word discrimination. Instead, she learned the much harder lesson of its practice, when the white students, through taunts and threats, made it difficult for the Chinese children to come out of Chinatown to attend class. As so many minority citizens have learned, it takes a sturdy character to cope. Lillie's given name was Chin Sui Gum, Chin being the family name, Sui meaning good omen, and Gum meaning gold. Her Sunday school teacher named her Lillie Chin, and while the Chin name changed with her marriage, Lillie stuck. Formal schooling ended after the 8th grade. She then followed in her mother's footsteps and got a job in a Chinese garment factory. For a spell, she also held down a part-time job selling shrimp for 5 cents a pound. While it was tiring and boring to the point of distraction, the garment factory experience turned into a blessing and was ideal training for her future. At first, her employers gave her only hems and cuffs to sew, then sleeves, and so on. In this way, she got to know the intricate complexities of garment manufacture so well that in later years, she could look at a dress in a store window, go home, cut the pattern, and sew it together. After the earthquake of 1906, there was a civic move to get the Chinese out of Chinatown. The residents, with their accustomed reserve, said nothing. At length, the well-meaning removers of the Chinese from some of the city's prime real estate in the heart of downtown chose a spot in the mud flats south of the city. When the Chinese power structure got news of this, they issued an ultimatum. Either they would rebuild in their old area, or they would move to Oakland. That did it. By the time the Great Fire hit the city, the Chinese had become so valuable to the economy, it was impossible to let them go. The Committee on Securing an Out-of-Town Site broke up and disappeared. Married at 18, Lillie discovered soon enough that her new husband was true to her after his fashion, to paraphrase Cole Porter lyric. And he soon drifted to other places, other climes. With 4 children to feed, children who were still in grammar school, Lillie was willing to take any job she could find, and before long found herself working at 4 of them. Every morning at 6 a.m., she got up, cooked breakfast, then trotted off to wait tables at the Mayflower coffee shop in Maiden Lane, just a few blocks from where she lived. She hustled breakfast until 11 a.m. From there, she walked to the Bohemian Club, where she had inherited a job serving popovers, a Bohemian specialty, in the dining room at lunchtime. At about 2:30, she walked down Post Street to Ransohoff's specialty store, where she did alterations until dinner time. An evening meal preceded her professional sewing chores, making dresses and gowns for some of San Francisco's most prominent women. It was a hard life, but in the Chinese tradition of patience and dogged persistence, she was able to keep her family together. The job at the Bohemian Club, San Francisco's world-famous gathering place for artists, writers, singers, actors, business tycoons, doctors, lawyers, merchant chiefs, plus any number of indigents who somehow get the dues money together each month in time to avoid expulsion, lasted 44 years. It wasn't exactly a position, since her work consisted of serving popovers and fancy breadstuffs to members at lunchtime. Taking her clientele into account, plus the contacts she made, the free legal and financial advice, and general morale-building support she got, staying 44 years at the same job was worth a good deal more than any ordinary paycheck. For the members who assembled in the dining room at lunchtime, her daily presence with her tray and the heavenly cargo it contained turned all thoughts of business irritations and traffic-related peaks into joyous expectancy. And woe betide the talkative member who delayed her in her rounds with some witticism he believed would win her future favor. Members did not take kindly to their fellow diners delaying her on her rounds. Not only was Lillie's tray of fancy breads a palliative for the pangs of lunchtime hunger, she was also a living symbol of a time when members and guests of the Bohemian Club thought of San Francisco as a magic city of mystery and excitement, where exotic adventures were a daily occurrence, and romance was only a step further up the street. Dressed in a cheongsam, a dress split up the sides that she had made herself, Lillie never failed to awaken both members and guests to the fact that San Francisco was not only a marvelous place to visit, but an even more marvelous place to live. Visitors who came to San Francisco for the first time from towns and villages in the Middle West felt, when they saw Chinese women in Oriental dress, that they were truly in a mysterious city. Prior to World War II, it was very much the style to engage members of the Chinese community to serve in highly visible spots. The St. Francis Hotel employed young Chinese women dressed in satin trousers and brocaded jackets as elevator operators. Magnon's department store also had Chinese elevator girls, and the Mark Hopkins provided Chinese attendants in their restrooms. San Francisco had been the gateway to the Orient for almost 3/4 of a century, and the city's merchant class did not intend to let either visitors or residents forget it. And John is asking in the chat for this video, so there really are bohemians as well as toffs at the Bohemian Club? Yes, indeed. It appears so. Lillie's good cheer and special brand of friendliness made her a favorite icon from the first day she walked her rounds. Since she was the only woman allowed in the dining room and kitchen for almost a quarter of a century, her entrance at lunchtime each day with her tray of hot popovers provoked immediate smiles among the otherwise complacent diners. Estimates of how many popovers she served in her years of service at best are guesstimates, but say she served 50 popovers a day, a likely number which over 44 years adds up to a total of 108,000. To accomplish this feat, she had to walk about 5,000 feet a week, which comes to a distance of 2,045 miles, not to mention 2,925,000 minutes of jolly conversation and inventive comment. Lily's memory for members' names to match each face was prodigious. Introduced once to a new member, she never forgot him. She could reach into her vast lexicon of names and make the most diffident bohemian feel he had always been one of her favorites, entitled to infinite service and attention. As she went about her daily chores, few of the members ever guessed the kind of life she had lived or was currently living, knowing only that she was an affable, charming woman who had this peculiar ability to remember almost the entire membership of 2,200 and could call forth a name no matter whether the man had visited the club dining room last week or last year. She might have heard a story 100 times in years gone by, yet she was able to smile and award the tale teller with intense eye contact. She gave mediocre storytellers the feeling they had suddenly been graduated to opening night professionalism at London's Palladium. As a recent manager of the club said, she was always on stage in the dining room. In her way, she had what theatrical people term star quality. The Bohemian Club hired her on June 1st, 1944, to replace her sister-in-law who had worked at the job for some years and was not happy with part-time work. Almost all members of the Bohemian Club knew Lillie, yet scarcely any of them realized she was the mother of 4 children and that she had been their sole support during their youth. Most members had no idea she was also a talented seamstress and made gowns for some San Francisco's most elegant women. Gowns that were signed pieces and bore the label, Lillie Lum Exclusive Chinese Dresses. Also, few appreciated that she was an ardent baseball fan with a wardrobe of Giants warm-up jackets, sweaters, t-shirts, caps, banners, and pennants who sometimes broke ranks and barded to Oakland's Municipal Stadium to witness an A's game. The managers of the Oakland Athletics were regulars at lunchtime, as was Bob Lurie, the owner of the San Francisco Giants. Mr. Lurie provided an endless stream of complimentary tickets. Both Mr. Lurie and Lily's daughters forgave her this minor lapse and marked it down to unexplained passions present in the baseball nut. Through a club member, Lillie also met Laura Folger, a casting director for various television and motion picture studios, and became a part-time performer in such forgettable television series as Midnight Caller and films like Dogfight and the pastiche I Married an Axe Murderer. For her first film, she wore a hat adorned with brilliant pheasant feathers made from a bird her daughter Rebecca had shot on an outing with Lily's brother, who then owned a sportsman's shop in Ileton. Lillie also appeared in several TV commercials. When Lillie finally retired on February 5, 1990, at the age of 79, and her 80th birthday was approaching in August of 1991, the president of the Bohemian Club thought it would be a capital idea to stage a dinner-time gala, to which he would not only invite bohemians and their ladies, but also almost all the Lum family. The austere and impressive room of the club on Taylor Street had rarely witnessed such a celebration. As members and guests were parking their cars in the Trader Vic lot across the street, the Lums arrived by limousine. In the club that evening were almost 400 guests in party finery, many of them dressed in gowns Lillie had created for them over the years. Each one of her clients greeted Lillie with a hug. Several bohemians who had known Lillie since they were first brought to the club by their fathers were invited to share the head table with Lillie and her daughters, Rebecca and Rowena, named after the characters in Walter Scott's Ivanhoe. The Lum girls, dressed in the Chinese style, sat in their seats of honor near their mother, who was resplendent in a white jacket embroidered with silver threads. Sons Arnold and Walton Lum sat at nearby tables of honor, together with prominent bohemians. It was not the first time Rebecca and Rowena had been in the club dining room. Both of them vividly remember when their mother, during the dark days of World War II, would bring them to the club to help with the popovers. Since there was no butter easily available, Lillie dressed the girls in Chinese costumes and told them to follow her around the room with trays loaded with peanut butter, cottage cheese, jellies and jams, and whatever else might provide a spread. As the birthday festivities broke up, the family began distributing red envelopes adorned with Chinese calligraphy to everyone present. Each envelope contained a dollar bill. The Lum family was merely following the ancient Chinese custom of returning good deeds for kind acts. Money is the preferred gift since the recipient can use it any way he wants, and the Chinese have always liked cash over any other reward. The color red signifies good fortune, prosperity, good health, and courage. Red and courage are the same word in the Chinese language. The Chinatown in which Lillie grew up was very different from the bustling tourist attraction it is today. Once upon a time, it was almost impossible for a Westerner to rent a space in the 26 square block area, but today, gift shops run by Iranians, Syrians, and other Middle Eastern imports line both sides of Grant Avenue as you leave the welcoming dragon-crested gate at the corner of Grant and Bush Streets. A gift from the Republic of China in 1969. It reminds visitors and tourists from around the world that Chinatown is a stepping-off place into another environment, a magic village of mystery and excitement, an idea reinforced, no doubt, by lurid stories of such gifted storytellers as Sax Rohmer, creator of the insidious Dr. Fu Manchu, and his odious dacoits, who made life miserable for all their enemies. Delicious shivers go with the territory. As the tourist climbs the hill toward California Street today, the smell of dried meat, orange peel, seaweed, rotting vegetables in the gutters, plus 100 other unidentifiable savors that only a professional perfumer could untangle and identify, assail his nostrils. At night, with the city wrapped in darkness, the heart of Chinatown takes on a misty, not quite real appearance. The old dark doorways that once were the entrances to opium dens, flights of stairs that disappear from the fog-choked alleyways into the misty upper levels of balconies led credence to fictional recitations of the craven practices of the Chinese slave girls trained in the arts of tantalizing American legionnaires or soldier boys from such places as Kankakee, Kansas City, and Cucamonga. It's a profitable whimsy. This version of Chinatown fantasy brought wide smiles to Lillie, but never would she ever have said anything to disabuse the unwary of their illusions or fantasies. The residents of Chinatown have learned over the years that enshrouding the area with mystery is good business, since excitement spawns dollars, lots of them. If titillation is what tourists want, then titillate them any way you can. If the strains of a scratchy stringed instrument echo from a doorway below street level, so much the better. If foghorns out in the bay sound as though they are in tune to provide a proper ambiance for this scene of creepy realities, fine. Just wait till I tell the boys back home about this, boy, oh boy. If Lillie seemed determined, tough, and unyielding to some of the managers and presidents of the club during her term in Bohemia, she had honed those characteristics early on. In fact, it was part of her psyche. Some presidents of recent years admitted that Lillie had a clever mind, but her stubbornness left them aghast. Had everyone concerned read James Michener's Hawaii, they could have saved their nervous systems much agitation, for in the section about the Chinese experience in Hawaii, Michener points out that the Chinese are far too independent to suffer servitude gladly. Once they have reached a certain degree of literacy, they demand equality. So while Lillie was willing to play the role of servant in Bohemia, waiting tables and dispensing popovers, in Chinatown, she was sole boss of her own business. Like many entrepreneurs, she brooked very little difference of opinion. Besides, her Chinese heritage had taught her that to show anger is to forfeit dignity. In Chinatown, it's don't get mad, get even. While Lillie may have been thought stubborn, this could have been another ancient trait or a national egotism and contempt for foreign ways developed over the centuries by China's geographical isolation from the rest of the world. In the minds of the Chinese, China is the center of the earth and has caused them to think of all outsiders as barbarians. Cut off from the rest of the planet by their geographical location and forced to become self-sufficient and original, the natives evolved a worldview that pays little regard to other nationalities. This exclusive attitude still baffles the average American, and having nothing to illuminate his jingoistic ignorance, Chinese reserve and unwillingness to try new things are baffling indeed. Today, Caucasians are termed fangwai or outsider. You look funny to us and we don't understand why you are the way you are. Consequently, inventing theories and legends about the Chinese in Chinatown has been a favorite sport of San Franciscans since the 1850s. Lillie's tenure at the Bohemian Club proved to be the centerpiece of her life, since it was there she met not only with some of the rich and powerful of San Francisco, but also with the gracious and thoughtful, all of whom became either friends or benefactors. Her daughter Becky delights to tell of the time her grandmother, Lillie's mother, was knocked down and had her leg broken by a truck on Kearny Street. Since the old woman spoke no English, but the trucking company and the insurance character, grasping for any advantage, said the accident was the fault of the old woman. The truck driver claimed she was jaywalking. The insurance company adjusters just shrugged. No amount of explanation helped. The truck company refused to pay any damages whatsoever, and the insurance company looked for an easy out and thought they had one. For a while. Lillie was at her wit's end, since the hospital and doctor's bills were gathering on her doorstep like confetti. While conducting the popover tour one day, she stopped to talk with Harold Faulkner, a federal trial lawyer long regarded as the dean of the San Francisco District Court. Harold said he would see what he could do. When the trucking company and the insurance group heard that Faulkner was on the case, they filed notice to dismiss and decided to pay up. Harold's usual poker face broke into a big grin. The mother got just compensation. Once again, Lillie thanked the good spirits that had made her Bohemian association possible. There was a time when Lillie felt if only she could get a $1,000 loan, she would use it to renovate a flat at 562 Grant Avenue, thus enabling her to keep an eye on her children and still work as a seamstress. A friend at the Chinatown branch of the Bank of America, who turned out to be not so friendly and was known to most Chinatown as the Iron Duchess, turned her down, saying, "Lillie, how could you feed and clothe 4 children and pay back $1,000? Lillie was not discouraged. She remembered she had friends in high places. There were bankers on her daily rounds, quite a number of them as it turned out. The story of the elusive loan gets a bit murky as there are several versions, each one sworn to as correct by enthusiastic witnesses. One account relates that Lillie got the loan from Pacific National Bank through the kindly offices of an ardent popover fan, who incidentally was also the president of the bank. Another tale involves Lillie's friendship with Joe Tobin, the long-time chief executive of the Hibernia Bank, who told her at lunch that if she would drop around after work, his secretary would have the papers filled out and the money would be ready for withdrawal. For Lillie, the Bohemian Club was a virtual cornucopia of professional help. So my child is supposed to be starting Kung Fu, but he's not coming down here. So I'm guessing his father has not brought him down here for Kung Fu. So we're going to keep reading because I like reading. Another gesture of friendship she remembered and loved to tell about was when a second banker, an inveterate party giver and practical joker, invited her as a guest at a cocktail party he was giving. When Lillie arrived, she was wearing such a smashing gown that the host introduced her to his wife and the assembled guests as the wife of the Chinese ambassador. Guests were falling all over themselves to press her hand. Lillie carried off the charade with style and grace. And it wasn't until the following morning that the host revealed the hoax to his wife. Thursday nights at the Bohemian Club are special. Cocktails in the cartoon room, dinners in the dining room, and afterwards, an entertainment by the talented members who abound on the roster of the club. At a Chinese night presented in the dining room without making too big a fuss about it, the master of the evening and one of his friends arranged for Lillie to array herself in her best oriental robes, pile her hair high on the top of her head, and thus powdered and rouged, be invited to sit at the head table as a guest of honor and distinction. At the appropriate moment, she was introduced as Mao Zedong's favorite concubine. Later, Lillie saw the man who had introduced her on the street and thanked him for making me famous. Perhaps 90,000 people live in Chinatown, making it one of the most densely populated areas in the United States. For people who love elbow-jostling, crowds, and clamor, it is an exciting place to walk. While the gutters may be filled with debris and the people shuffling along the sidewalks look none too prosperous, it is a far cry from a poverty pocket. In the early days before women were allowed to immigrate, it was by no means unusual to find 10 bunks in a room 12 by 8. Without such close proximity, the average resident felt lonely. Communal kitchens and communal bathrooms are a way of life. Even the Chinese admit that Chinatown is nothing more than a ghetto, but as one said, so what? It's our ghetto. 77% of the buildings fail to satisfy San Francisco's strict building codes, and it is not unusual during periods of heavy rain to walk up Grant Avenue and look down into basements half full of water. In the confines of this crowded area are 8 commercial banks, each one swarming with customers. On deposit is a whopping $837,804,000,000. Is that right? No, I got my digits wrong. Sorry, everybody. On deposit is a whopping $837,804,000. There are also 7 savings and loan banks and 1 credit union, bringing the total cash on hand to well over $1 billion. And that's not counting the money stashed away in safe deposit boxes or in family association banks or stuffed into chests under beds. As anyone can plainly decode, Chinatown is a huge money load for an area that the outside world regards as not having 2 thin dimes to rub together. Much of this money is undoubtedly flight capital, estimated to be as much as 1/2 the deposits placed by immigrants who anticipated the reclamation of Hong Kong in 1997 by the People's Republic of China. The torrent of cash from Hong Kong was almost unreal. The rest is testimony to the Chinese attitude toward wealth. No one cares how much you make. It's how much you save that counts. Although there are San Franciscans who believe 40% of the inhabitants are in poverty, they make the mistake of equating frugality with want. In Chinatown, safe deposit boxes are hard to find since they are all rented. Since they are unusually thrifty people, saving as much as 80% of their income is not extraordinary. There's a joke that a Chinese who makes $15 a week is able to save $16. For people who have endured what amounts to a continuous life of hardships, a few months or even years of straightened living is not a burden. To gain freedom for themselves and their families, they have swum the river from Canton to Hong Kong, clambered over mountains in freezing weather, spent months in open boats in raging seas, all to escape the delights of some future great leap forward or second cultural revolution, movements that have been so prevalent in China's recent past. Besides, at the other end of the rainbow stands Gum San, or Gold Mountain, as early freedom hunters called California. The Chinese are naturally reserved and feel that prominence and the display of wealth or good fortune invites disaster. They keep their riches under cover, lest any display might bring disaster. If not disaster, then certainly the Internal Revenue Service. An old saying is, never count your money in front of strangers. Evil spirits are ever ready to snatch good fortune from boasters. Saving money amounts almost to a passion, and very little is spent on dishwashers, garbage disposals, microwave ovens, and other appliances Americans regard as necessities. An astounding example is a female kitchen helper. She spoke no English and had been in this country only 5 years. For her toil among the greasy pots and heaps of smeared dishes, she earned $700 a month. To verify her employment, she came to her boss one day to get some papers signed. When questioned about the reason she was borrowing money, this mother of 3 children explained she had made an offer on a duplex dwelling in the Sunset District. It was yet another story to add to the lore of the Chinese who show up in the Richmond and Sunset districts to buy a house and carry the full purchase price in cash from the depths of a raggedy shopping bag. Lillie was one of those Chinese who believed in work as a device invented for the manufacture of money. She attacked her work, whatever it might be, with the same intensity as a commodities trader on the Chicago Exchange. Outsiders think that Chinese work long hours because they like to. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Many newcomers start out as street peddlers, and within a few years they have saved enough to start a small business. Whole families still live in one room with a common bath area and no separate kitchen. Naturally, many who live in this crowded manner yearn to escape, but lack of English and feeling they will always be strangers in America traps them into believing they must stay where they are. Although Lillie was seldom sick, her employment record at the Bohemian Club lists a Western doctor as well as a Chinese herbalist. In this regard, she was following the everyday customs of Chinatown. Hedge all bets where you can and thwart the evil spirits, be they benign or virulent. One of the best-known herbal specialists in Chinatown is the Yao Hing Apothecary shop on the west side of Grant Avenue. A narrow but high-walled and deep premises, it stocks rows of Chinese herbs in glass jars crowded on the shelves that line the walls. Ginseng, dried seahorse, shark tail skeletons, and ground antlers, still covered with velvet, are standard stock in trade. As of the present, Chinatown has many new herb stores staffed by pharmacists who have come from the People's Republic and who know the secrets of combining the several hundred ingredients of the Chinese pharmacopoeia. In every shop are clerks who weigh and measure the ingredients, then pour them out on paper to be folded and delivered to the customer. Anyone with a modicum of curiosity should pick up the San Francisco telephone directory where, under herbalists, are two tightly packed columns of these ages-old therapeutists, both wholesale and retail. You can see when this was written, as there was still a telephone directory to be picked up. Not long ago, the Department of Fish and Game raided a wholesale apothecary shop. The inspectors found such exotica as tiger penises, powdered rhino horn, illegal abalone, and trays of North American black bear gallbladders. Such discoveries were real-time evidence of a suspected $100 million a year animal parts industry in California. The natives smile wisely and say, "In Chinatown, you can buy anything if you have the money." Gung hei fat choi, sun nin fai lok. Wishing you good fortune, joy, happiness, and of course their concomitants, profit and prosperity. Happy New Year from Chinatown to all and sundry on the occasion of the Chinese New Year is a festival, a happening, a gala, a fete, a blowout, a jamboree, a field day, and general frolic. Lillie spent most of the year looking forward to this marvelous period of Far Eastern happiness and joy. In Chinatown, New Year's celebrations are a very big deal and all. People who rarely emerge from their quiet alleyways deck the halls with peach and plum blossoms and celebrate the Lunar New Year with parades, fanciful dragons, ferocious lions, walking puppets that tell stories from Chinese myths and legends, and indulge in a spectacle that is widely recognized as one of a kind in the world. Oriental splendor is put on display with style and enthusiasm. The Chinese New Year is closely tied to the cycles of planting and harvest, marking the end of one farming year and the advent of the next, usually occurring somewhere between the end of January and the middle of February, following the winter solstice and the right phases of the moon, as befits an agricultural society with a history that dates back 10,000 years. This is the time of the year when farmers come into positions of honor. In China, field workers are considered at the top of the social heap. Then come the traders and professional men. Lowest of all, on par with actors and barbers, are lawyers. For 135 years now, Chinatown has observed the traditional Chinese New Year, the origins of which go back to 2697 BC. San Francisco's Chinatown has celebrated it since the beginning of the 1860s, the first party being in 1851 when the elders of the community decided to win the goodwill of the San Francisco police. The festivity began as a relatively simple dinner. As time droned on, it became more elaborate. In the early days, the principals got dressed in finery of velvet and gold, and the aristocrats of the area put on their most costly fur and silk robes with black satin pants fitting tightly at the ankles. Today, the sidewalks crawl with people in jeans, tennis shoes, and warm-up jackets. The Chinese New Year festival actually lasts 10 days, but nowadays, thanks to popular demand, mostly on the part of the promoters, it has been drawn out to 2 weeks by adding such events as beauty pageants and such. For most Chinese, the first week is soberly observed with friends and family, attending various temples in the area and arranging for banquets and feasts. It used to be that family dinners were held in the home, but today most Chinese Americans gather in restaurants, and such family celebrations go on throughout the holidays. The second week, however, is a much less solemn time. Marked by entertainments for the public, the festival polishes up community relations with street fairs, dancing in the streets, a parade, a beauty contest with appropriate queens, a fashion show, and finally the giant procession that has grown to be an annual television special sponsored by the San Francisco Chronicle. The first order of business for most families is to make a clean sweep of the family home, the main idea being to rid the house of the bad spirits of yesteryear and welcome any salutary newcomers that might be flitting about. Everyone joins in the house cleaning, sweeping out the old and inviting in the new. Some families put away their knives and scissors so as not to cut their luck during the coming year. It is traditional to visit grandparents and parents before visiting anyone else. Once the house is clean, the family begins to decorate. They put up their best pictures and special scrolls that contain short poems written in classical Chinese and are expressions of goodwill for the family in the coming year. Also popular are arrangements of fruit, mostly oranges, since the Chinese word for orange sounds very much like the word for wealth, and tangerine sounds like good fortune. Also, arrangements of spring flowers, the plum blossom being especially popular since they symbolize longevity and courage. Almost any flowering branch will do. A half dozen oranges, a couple of eggs, and a green pepper, and a Chinese can lay them on a table so skillfully they will automatically fall into a picture. The Chinese create art from the ordinary fragments of life and have an instinctive sense of decoration. This is also said of Chinese cooks. Any disparate ingredient can almost instantly be made into a gourmet meal. New clothes and a haircut are also thought appropriate for New Year's Day. The color red is everywhere since red is the symbol for happiness. Stores are decorated with poetic couplets and scrolls. Everyone tries to pay his or her debts before the new year begins, as it is considered bad luck to leave debts hanging around. Since the Chinese are inherently honest, the discharge of debts, both public and private, is treated with solemnity enough to cheer the heart of the most heartless Fagin. When Lillie first started giving her famous Chinese New Year's dinner parties in the Sun Hung Hyung restaurant in Chinatown, an establishment run by her good friends Lily and William Ju, she invited as many as 120 guests. The parties for the Caucasian Americans were held to appreciate things done during the year just past, and also to teach the Fangguai, or Caucasians, something about Chinese culture. Lillie's party, although somewhat less formal than ritual, nonetheless demonstrated the heartfelt thanks she felt toward members of the Bohemian Club who had been so good to her. Planning the party, however, got complicated, and she finally reduced the numbers to a mere 15 or 20. At the beginning, people would call and ask, "Is so-and-so going to be there?" When Lillie replied in the affirmative, they would say, "Then please seat me where I won't be near them." Or someone else would call and ask who was to be at their table, and if they didn't feel they were going to sit with the right people, they canceled out. For a time, she tried to keep the guests happy by staging 3 or 4 dinners during the New Year's period, 20 or so guests at a time, but eventually Lillie got weary of the social bickering and cut the numbers. At the end, anyone invited felt it was a rare honor, which of course it was. At dinner, Lillie kept up a running commentary to explain the various dishes. There were at least 12 different viands of one kind or another, plus a number of potent Chinese liquors of unknown but substantial origin. Food at a Chinese feast is one of the most important aspects of the New Year, since every holiday has its own special food. Sausage, shark's fin soup, salted and dried meats, smoked fish, oysters and clams. These are included because in Cantonese the word for fish has the same sound as the word for surplus, so it stands for a surplus of good fortune. The word for carp is the same as the word profit and is deemed a good omen. So, naturally, if you serve carp to a guest, you are wishing him profit during the new year. The word for oysters, which is hu, is the same word that is used for an auspicious occasion. So, naturally, oysters would become part of a New Year's celebration. Chinese cabbage, or bok choy, sound like the term for great wealth, but taste and nutrition are not the only considerations. As an added fillip to the feast, the presentation of the food must be aesthetically satisfying, which also accounts for the superb beauty of the dinnerware at a Chinese party. The Chinese place great stock in food, and often instead of asking, "How are you?" they will question, "Have you eaten?" which accounts in a small way for the extraordinary number of bakeries. 26 bakeries in the 26 square blocks plus a dozen fish markets. Lillie used to explain that the Chinese have rich traditions with legends and authentic pageantry. The new year gives us a chance to show off our art, music, dance, and drama, and showcase it for the public so we can share it with all Americans. In the Chinese folklore, everyone adds a year to his age on the 7th day of the new year. Regular birthdays have little meaning. Also, Lillie would explain Chinese customs and culture, an example of which was a warning not to sweep the floor on New Year's Day, lest you sweep all your wealth away. Lillie was so well known among the Chinese community that if the dinner was held on the same night as the big parade, everyone could adjourn to the balcony as watch as the drum majors and various other dignitaries saluted her. The guest list at these gatherings was not exclusively Bohemian, but there was a considerable representation since the entire purpose of the get-together was to repay the friendly favors Lillie had experienced during the previous year. In the Chinese culture, kindness begets kindness, and this was Lillie's way of paying off. Lillie would gather the guests on the balcony to watch the parade, where they could see the crowds jostling one another. As they peered over the mass of humanity in front of them, straining to see the lion dancers, they caught glimpses of the 1,000-foot-long dragon made of paper, silk, and bamboo. It writhed and undulated from one side of the street to the other, for Western eyes a bizarre sight. Today, the paraders wear special finery, bedazzled and bejeweled, created by the best costumers in Hong Kong. Symbol of happiness, joy, and prosperity, the color red is once again seen everywhere. The parade winds between the packed curbside musicians as they bang away on drums, gongs, cymbals, and bells. This by way of competing with the firecrackers exploding on the balconies all across the way, littering the sidewalks and the pedestrians with red and green paper scraps. All this noise is supposed to drive away the evil spirits that might be lurking about. In early days, teenagers and young men would launch what amounted to small bombs in the crowded scene, but the police finally put a stop to this mayhem, despite the pleas that evil spirits need much banishing. The grand climax of the holiday is the Dragon Parade. At length, the fun runs out, and everyone gets back to doing whatever it was he was doing 2 weeks ago. After she retired, Lillie spent her days reading and watching television, with occasional trips to Reno to play Keno, a gambling game introduced to Americans by the Chinese of an earlier period. Her favorite pastime in Reno, however, was just plain old slot machines. Lillie understood and liked Fan-Tan, but it was not her game of choice. While Mahjong and Pai Gow are popular games in Chinatown today, the biggest gambling game is football pools. Fan-Tan has always been a gambling game peculiar to the Chinese and a great favorite of novelists who like to dwell on the lurid aspects of Chinese life. It is a game that is simplicity itself. One bets on whether a heap of coins or buttons or whatever in the center of a long table is odd or even in number. Once the bets are down, the proprietor begins to withdraw markers, 2 at a time, until either 1 or 2 coins or buttons are left, or any odd or even number. The people who guess correctly are the winners. If none is left, then even is considered the winner. It is a pure and simple game of chance without a vestige of skill involved. Depending on the type of bet, there are 3 ways of winning in less than an hour. $50 can explode into thousands. Hundreds of thousands of dollars are in play almost every day in Chinatown. Gamblers play the games privately, but in an otherwise open area, so there will be no accusations of cheating. At retirement, Lillie moved into the 300 block on Union Street, a building owned by her daughter Rowena's husband, Joe Jiang, who stems from a Chinese family that can trace its origins back some 2,500 years. Here, she entertained her immediate family as well as numerous grandchildren, one of whom is a professor of physiological psychology at Mesa Community College in San Diego. Both of Lillie's daughters were graduated from San Francisco State University. Rebecca recently retired from the Fairfield Unified School District, where she taught mathematics. Rowena worked for the Bechtel Corporation for a number of years and then went to the Bay Area Rapid Transit, or BART, where she was employed as the first female draftswoman. After 17 years at BART, Rowena is now retired. Son Walton works as a machinist for Compair, a manufacturer of aeronautical instruments. Son Arnold is retired from the Municipal Railway, where he was employed as a bus driver. Lillie's last hours were as difficult as her life. A stroke knocked her down on the floor of her apartment, where she lay for 2 days before her daughter Rowena, anxious at not being able to raise her mother by telephone, came to the apartment, got her key, and let herself in to find her mother in a state of shock. Lillie was taken to Kaiser Hospital and then released to St. Francis Convalescent Pavilion. For 3 months, she struggled to get well, but a second stroke was one too many, and she died on June 2nd, 1993. Since her given name, Gum, meaning gold, had always intrigued her, she had many times expressed the wish that she should be buried by Golden Gate. At the end, her ashes were dropped at sea by the family just off the Golden Gate, that historic passage that has been an avenue of life for so many thousands of yearners for freedom and strivers for excellence. NB. So many people have asked for a description of Chinese tongs that it appears necessary to tag this addendum. First off, there are no tongs in China. It's true, there have been secret societies in China since the Qin dynasty, but the tongs of Chinatown are an American invention, as American as Indiana Jones. Tongs are fraternal guilds and generally are related to merchant trade. Shopkeepers, small store owners, druggists, and so on become members to protect themselves against encroachment by outsiders, or just plain gangsters. Some tongs are developed to exploit anything and everything they can for profit, and if that entails crime of one sort or another, well, that's what you have to expect. Most Westerners think tongs are some kind of gangster conclave, and indeed, some are. But the vast majority of tongs are like the old guilds of the Middle Ages. The Tea Merchants Guild, for instance, fixes the price of tea, and if one of the members is found guilty of cutting prices, he is either roundly reprimanded or driven into bankruptcy. Chinese associations of this sort are strict and unyielding in their judgments. In China, difficulties are settled within a family or village, or as a last resort, the district in which the contenders live, but this is no longer true in America. It used to be that litigants in a Chinese dispute settled their problems within a tong. If this failed, matters were referred to the U.S. courts, widely considered the worst solution of all. In the past, if the contenders were wealthy enough, they might tire of the whole affair and hire a gunman to shoot the other party. It's been done. Entering a tong is not all that easy. If you want to become a member, you have to have a friend who will vouch for you. He must swear to your character and reputation, and then the tong sends out its sleuths to examine the evidence for a period of 1 month. Local men of affairs find belonging to a tong a useful adjunct to their business life, since if anyone threatens you or your business, the tong comes into action to discourage the interloper. Tongs are also useful for newcomers in finding people who immigrated from China some time back. And that is the end of the chapter on Lillie Lum. So tomorrow I'll be back to read about Treasure Island. Treasure Island. If we know Treasure Island. Is there treasure there? Thank you for joining me for another hour of book reading. I'll be back again tomorrow to read more. I'm enjoying this book. by my grandfather, nowhere except San Francisco. Memoirs of a Resident Tourist. His name was Tro Harper. We're having fun reading about San Francisco. I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful day, and I will see you again soon. Take care.